This is the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II, and this is the iPhone 15 Pro. Should you invest in a smartphone like this, or spend the extra money on a dedicated content creator camera like this? To answer that, we will have to look at their differences from a real-world standpoint. I'm not concerned with what the manufacturers of both of these devices have to say. I'm interested in how both of these cameras perform in real-world situations, because that's how you will experience these cameras if you decide to purchase either one of them. I'm going to treat this comparison as an actual use case type of video and focus on the image quality and usability. I love testing cameras and pushing them to their limits. That way, I know where their thresholds lie between amazing image quality and unusable footage. If you haven't had a chance to try out either of these cameras and want to see how their video file sizes and clips will work on your editing setups, I've got some free project files for you to check out. I've included the clips with different frame rates and resolutions, as well as log profile clips in both S-Log3 and ProRes log, and some photography so that you can download them and try them out before you purchase either of these. This will allow you to compare the footage without dealing with YouTube's compression. You can find the link to download that footage in the description below. If you are, however, planning on picking up the ZV-E10 Mark II, I'm in the process of making a comprehensive course on how to set it up, how to shoot with it in different lighting environments, and how to just get the most out of it. In fact, by the time you're watching this video, that course may be complete. I'll leave a link in the description in case you want to check it out. As we always do in camera comparisons, can you tell the difference between these two shots? And before I reveal to you which camera is which, let me tell you what we will be covering today. We're gonna look at their log footage S-Log3 out of the ZV-E10 Mark II and ProRes log out of the iPhone 15 Pro. We will see how both camera sensors read out skin tones in the normal color profile in different lighting environments. We will see how both cameras can handle dynamic range when we're shooting directly into the sun, along with how they perform in low light environments. We will test out their electronic stabilization while hand-holding and walking with the cameras, and then throwing the ZV-E10 Mark II up on a gimbal to give it a little bit more help. We will test out their temperature thresholds and see how fast both cameras heat up in different resolutions and frame rates, and see if and when either camera overheats. We're going to look at how they can handle green screen work if you're someone who likes to key out products in your videos. We'll see if they make a good combination as an A cam and a B cam setup. We'll shoot with both cameras in Program Auto as a beginner would. I downloaded the Final Cut camera app so I could have more control over my exposure and lens selection. But this comparison focuses on the use case of the native camera within the iPhone. We are going to recreate a natural habitat and shoot some macro just like I did in my last video to see how close these colors match up when we put them side by side. We will be doing an overhead product shot as a content creator would, someone who might only be able to get one of these two cameras. We're gonna do some vlogging with them. We'll see what that frame looks like and listen to their audio. We're gonna do some wildlife videography and photography. Well, maybe not wildlife, but definitely wilder than me. We will be talking about which camera is for whom and their ease of use, and I'll be sharing side-by-side videos all along the way. The goal of this video is to give you clarity on not only which camera is right for you, but also show you the contrast between a dedicated content creating camera like this and a smartphone with amazing camera capabilities. All right, we have a lot to cover and look at, and I'd love for you to tell me which one of these two cameras you like better and why. And that's what we will be tackling today on the Film Alliance. If you looked at both of those shots at the beginning of this video and you could correctly name the camera, then I have to give it to you because I was putting this together, and if it wasn't for the file names on the clips themselves, there were some shots that I may have not known. Some, not all. If by the end of this video, you're still undecided about which one of these two cameras is best for you, I made a free camera quiz that may help you get on the right track, and I'll leave a link to that quiz in the description. The APS-C lenses that I'll be using for the ZV-E10 Mark II are as follows. The kit lens, which is a 16-50 f3.5 to 5.6, as if this was the only lens that you could afford and you wanted to just go out and start filming with it. The Viltrox 13mm f1.4 to get some good wide shots, some vlogging shots, and some expansive urban landscapes, and skyscrapers. The Tamron 17-70mm f2.8 to test out the different skin tones, use it as a documentary lens, and get some macro shots and some vertical content as well. And then also our telephoto lens, which is a Sony 55-210 4.5 to 6.3 for some of those telephoto shots and for some wildlife. I didn't choose which one of the lenses I should use on the iPhone because it automatically switches between lenses when you zoom in and out. Unless you're using the Final Cut camera app where you can select between 3 different lenses and zoom from within those lenses. Freewell also makes an iPhone 15 Pro lens kit that I made an entire video on. I'll leave that video in the description in case you're interested in picking up extra lenses for your iPhone 15 Pro. But the ZV-E10 Mark II does have interchangeable lenses, which is the first big difference, meaning you can change out the lenses, which means you'll have more creative freedom when it comes to using the Mark II. You could also throw full frame lenses on your APS-C camera. It just won't be as sharp as if you used APS-C lenses. So right off the bat, when it comes to pricing, the ZV-E10 will be a lot more expensive, especially when you start adding extra lenses compared to the iPhone, which you can just open up straight out of the box and start shooting with it. But because you do have the ability to interchange lenses, that means you'll have more creative options when it comes to shooting with the Mark II compared to the iPhone. I shot in all different types of lighting environments so that we would really be able to see all of the differences. This video is not being sponsored by Apple or Sony. Sony did lend me out the ZV-E10 Mark II, but I had to return it and neither company is compensating me. This video is purely my views only from an unbiased standpoint. Let's focus on their highlights, their pricing, and what they can do. The ZV-E10 Mark II is an APS-C camera with a 26 megapixel sensor that can shoot in 10-bit 4K up to 60 frames per second. It can shoot in 422 all intra and weighs 13.2 ounces with the battery and media inserted. It can shoot in S-Cinetone, and it was created as a dedicated content creator camera. The iPhone 15 Pro has a 48 megapixel sensor that can shoot in 4K up to 60. It can shoot in ProRes log and weighs 6.60 ounces, which is half the weight of the ZV-E10 Mark II. It comes with fixed lenses with multiple focal lengths, and it has mind-blowing stabilization starting at $999 US. Both cameras were released within 1 year of each other. The ZV-E10 Mark II was released in July of 2024, and the 15 Pro was released in September of 2023. If you like videos like this one, make sure to like this video so I know to make more videos like this one. All right, let's talk about their bodies. If you compare the ZV-E10 Mark II to the iPhone 15 Pro, you can clearly tell there's a major difference when it comes to their bodies, mainly in the size and the weight. The ZV-E10 Mark II has a traditional size and weight and form factor of a dedicated vlogging camera setup. It's got an actual grip on it. It's got ports on the side, including a mic port, a headphone port, and buttons and dials for ease of use and more customization. The iPhone 15 Pro, on the other hand, has a much bigger display, better touchscreen functionality, and it can fit right in your pocket. And out of all the cameras that I own, I shoot mostly with the iPhone because it's so convenient to just pull out and start filming with it. And if you're a casual shooter, there's less chance of a security guard coming up to you and telling you to stop filming on the property if you're filming with an iPhone. While I was on location filming the ZV-E10 Mark I versus the ZV-E10 Mark II, I had 2 different security guards come up to me at 2 different times and tell me that I couldn't film. In fact, one of them even told me that I could film with my phone, just not a dedicated content creator camera. So if you want to be more inconspicuous when you're out filming, then the iPhone would be the way to go. Although the iPhone setup is so much smaller and more convenient to use than the ZV-E10 Mark II, I come from a full-frame mirrorless A7S III, which I'm filming this headshot on, and I usually throw this camera up onto a gimbal, and it usually has a full-frame lens on it. So the small form factor of the ZV-E10 Mark II with an APS-C lens on it is a literal dream come true in form factor compared to a bigger rig setup like the A7S III. But it is a lot bigger than the iPhone. I do think that it still qualifies as a small and compact setup and portable to use. But it definitely doesn't beat out the iPhone, there's no question about it. I think the trade-off of having a bigger setup like this camera compared to a smaller fit-in-your-pocket setup like this is in the image quality, especially in low light. Don't worry, we will get to that. By the way, if you don't already follow me, nice to meet you. I'm Joe, and I cover videos on different cameras and who they're for and how I use them. So if you like videos like that, I'd love for you to join the Film Alliance by subscribing. Let's keep going. The ZV-E10 Mark II is made more for intermediate users or on the upper end of the camera triangle. This means it's going to be tougher to learn, it's going to take some practice, and it's going to take a lot of trial and error to get your images to look right. Whereas with the iPhone, you really need no experience at all. Anyone could just open up the box and go out and start shooting with the 15 Pro. Grandma could use the iPhone, but I'm sure she wouldn't be able to get 4K 60 manually exposed, cinematic, powerhouse looking footage in 422 10-bit. The iPhone has way less exposure control, meaning you don't have that much control over how your image will look. Unless you download the Final Cut Camera app, which gives you more control over your shutter speed, your ISO, and your white balance. But because the aperture is fixed in the iPhone 15 Pro, you cannot adjust your aperture. It's fun and it's easy to use straight out of the box. Although it does have ProRes log, which makes it a contender to someone who's serious about getting into good-looking cinematic video. I did shoot quite a bit in ProRes log 4K 24 and 4K 60, externally recording to a SSD, and the footage was absolutely amazing. But it did add to the form factor of the camera, and those ProRes log file sizes are huge. But if I'm only filming some family stuff or non-professional work, then the iPhone 15 Pro was really nice to have. Also, the ZV-E10 Mark II's weight and form factor are way less travel-friendly and portable than just walking out the door with your phone. When you have a setup like this, you have to make sure that your glass is clean, the sensor is free of dust, your card has been formatted, and the battery is full. But speaking about formatting your SD card, the ZV-E10 Mark II does have removable storage and removable batteries, so you can bring a couple different SD cards or batteries with you wherever you go. That way you don't find yourself in a situation where you run out of power or storage and you can't film for the rest of the day. With the iPhone 15 Pro, you have to make sure that you're offloading your data into a computer at the end of the day. Sometimes that can take a long time, especially if you're transferring those ProRes log files. So when it comes to transferring files and making sure you have enough juice and media storage, it definitely goes to the Mark II. If you're a vertical shooter who likes to get short form video content, the ZV-E10 Mark II can record in 16:9, where you will be able to see the full display while you hold the camera vertically. And the 15 Pro can also record vertically simply by just holding it up and down like this. The playback interface on the 15 Pro is bigger and it's easier to use than the playback with the ZV-E10 Mark II. I love watching playback on the phone because the display is way more touch sensitive, it's clear, and it's a lot bigger, so I can see how the image was exposed better. Whereas the ZV-E10 Mark II's playback function, you cannot scrub along the video to try to get to different spots in the clip. You just have to fast forward using the little scroll wheel. Because of the iPhone's fixed aperture, and with everything being in focus, it doesn't have to work as hard as when I'm using a lens like the Tamron 17-70 on the end of the ZV-E10 Mark II. But I do think the ZV-E10 Mark II does have the upper hand when it comes to autofocus, because you can set it up to track humans, animals, and birds. The ZV-E10 Mark II does have touch tracking though, so you can actually focus on a moving subject, and as long as you keep the camera pointed at that moving subject, it will stay in focus. Thankfully, if you're an iPhone shooter and you're not shooting something too close to the lens, everything will be in focus already because of its fixed aperture. So you don't really have to worry about if something's going to be in focus or not. So that just comes down to what type of video you want to shoot. Do you want everything to be in focus? Then the iPhone may suit you well. But if you want the option to have some blurriness in your background, then I would go with the ZV-E10 Mark II. And if you're not that confident on how to get a blurrier background using lower apertures, this camera has something called background defocus, which is a quick toggle to get your subject in the foreground in focus and everything in the background to be blurry. Let's talk about their price. When we look at both cameras, the ZV-E10 Mark II is the same price as the iPhone 15 Pro, but if you really want to get the most out of your Mark II, I would say you're gonna have to invest in some nice glass. For example, when I throw this Tamron 17-70 on the end of the ZV-E10 Mark II, now we're talking about a $1,700 setup compared to the $999 that you get right out of the door with the iPhone 15 Pro. But with that being said, your image quality will be far superior than what you would get with the iPhone. Yes, you can zoom in with the iPhone, but there are certain parts in the zoom where it switches between lenses, and when it does that, it chops up your video. It doesn't look very good. Whereas when you do it with something like the Tamron 17-70, you get some nice, smooth pushes. Also, the Mark II has something called breathing compensation, and this helps with your videos to have a smoother transition between the foreground and the background. Also, the digital zoom inside the iPhone degrades the image quality because it essentially enlarges the existing pixels in the image, which can result in a loss of detail and increased pixelation. Unlike optical zoom that you would get with this setup, which uses a lens to bring the subject closer without sacrificing the image quality, digital zoom simply magnifies the existing image, leading to a decrease in overall image sharpness and clarity. We know this is a dedicated camera with a dedicated lens on the end of it, which means that's going to be a more expensive setup. And we also know that the image quality will be a lot better, but the question is, by how much? Sometimes people care more about their image quality over their portability and ease of use. So let's talk about their image quality. The 15 Pro can shoot in 4K 60, and the E10 Mark II can shoot in 4K up to 60. But the 4K 60 out of the ZV-E10 Mark II does have a 1.1 times crop, which means it will change the focal length of the lens that you're using. I've been showing you different shots and all different resolutions up until now, but that crop doesn't have me too worried between 4K 60 and 4K 24 because 1.1 times crop is not that much. And as you can see, both cameras have different looks to them. The iPhone can shoot in 422 10-bit and ProRes up to 30 frames per second internally and 4K 60 externally. And the ZV-E10 Mark II can shoot 422 10-bit, 4K 60 in S-Log3. When we compare the S-Log footage from the ZV-E10 Mark II to the ProRes log footage that you get out of the 15 Pro, there is more room to grade the colors with the ZV-E10 Mark II due to the detail that you get out of the Mark II's sensor size. With that said, the ProRes footage from the 15 Pro was really nice to have, and I could use both cameras in the same shoot and grade the log footage from the ZV-E10 Mark II to match up pretty close to the iPhone 15 Pro. This makes the iPhone 15 Pro a potential great B cam to the ZV-E10 Mark II, and a contestant as someone who might be looking for a B cam who already owns a dedicated content creator camera like this. I used both cameras in an A cam, B cam setup to see if there were any problems at all as far as colors go when we were in a kind of studio looking environment just like this. And I was finding that I was able to match up the colors pretty good in post-production, but there is a difference and a quality fall off with the smaller sensor on the 15 Pro. Many people still shoot in 1080 due to the smaller file size and easier workflow. I found that the 1080 120 footage from the ZV-E10 Mark II was a bit sharper and easier to grade than the slow motion footage or the 1080 120 footage I got with the 15 Pro. And I believe the reason this is because this sensor is a lot smaller than this huge sensor, so this one's able to capture more light and produce a sharper image. It definitely was not as sharp as I was hoping for. The ZV-E10 Mark II also has 10 creative looks with 8 different adjustable parameters within those creative looks. And it also has picture profiles, so someone could stylize their footage either in camera with the creative looks or in post-production a lot easier than if someone was just shooting straight out of camera with the iPhone. The ProRes log footage inside the iPhone definitely makes it a lot easier to color grade on the same level as the S-Log footage out of the ZV-E10 Mark II, but the file sizes are much larger, as I keep on reiterating to you just to make sure you understand they're huge. Also, when you record in ProRes log, you have to transfer that file either by airdropping it or through the USB-C port on the bottom of the camera, whereas with the ZV-E10 Mark II, you can record that footage to your SD card, which you can simply pull out, plug it into your computer, and offload it that way. So I think log footage is a lot easier to work with when it comes to the ZV-E10 Mark II. The ZV-E10 Mark II also has something called breathing compensation. And breathing compensation on the Mark II refers to a feature that minimizes the change in the angle of view that can occur while you're focusing. It's also known as focus breathing. This feature helps maintain a consistent composition when adjusting your focus, which is especially useful in video production to avoid distracting shifts in framing or during focus pulls. The iPhone does have cinematic mode though, and although I loved using it, it did come with some drawbacks. While I was out filming with it and I watched it on playback on the iPhone display, it looked great. I thought, oh, this is really cool, I gotta use this more often. But then once I got home and I put it on the big screen, that's where I could really see that fake digital blur. And when I compare that blur to the ZV-E10's blur, the ZV-E10's bokeh is way more natural looking because you're using a dedicated lens. So there's a pretty big difference when it comes to that. I don't know if someone who's into this stuff all the time would really tell a difference between those two different background blurs, but I sure did. You also cannot use ProRes log in cinematic mode So just remember that, and you lose the ability to shoot in 4K 60. I set my iPhone up to record cinematic mode in 4K 24 as my default. Let's talk about stabilization. Both cameras do have in-body stabilization, but in my opinion, the iPhone stabilization is way better. Both cameras do have some drawbacks. When you're using action mode in the 15 Pro, the stabilization is amazing, but the image quality downgrades to 2.8K, and in low light, the image falls apart to almost unusable looking footage. You even get a little warning sign that tells you you need more light is required if it detects you're crossed a low light threshold, and it does, it needs more light, because I continue to shoot in action mode in low light and all of my footage was unusable. Either way, the action mode on the 15 Pro is way better than the active stabilization mode on the ZV-E10 II. The ZV-E10 II crops in 1.5 times when you turn on active stabilization. This is why I recommend you picking up a gimbal and then turning off active stabilization so you don't lose any more of that crop. Don't forget that every time you crop in, you're losing sensor area. You'll get poor low light performance and you won't get as wide of a view. Whether you're vlogging or just going handheld, the footage from the iPhone looks close to gimbal-like footage. You do have to turn on enhanced stabilization within the 15 Pro because you lose that smooth footage effect if you don't. The ZV-E10 II, on the other hand, is decent, but definitely not like gimbal-like footage that you get with the 15 Pro, unless you throw that footage through Catalyst Browse. I'm not a big fan of Catalyst Browse, which is Sony's third-party app that you can put your footage through to really smooth out your footage, but I don't like to do that because it takes extra time in my workflow. When I get to post-processing, I like to get my clips into the timeline. Maybe I'll throw a little post-production stabilization in Final Cut Pro, but other than that, I like to just put my clips together and export the videos. But every user might be different. You might like to spend the extra time trying to get your footage to look gimbal-like because that will enhance your video. But in my opinion, it's always best to get the footage right in camera. That's why I would prefer to just pick up a gimbal for the ZV-E10 II. Both stabilization systems do have their advantages and disadvantages. Also, if you're shooting in that 1080-120, you won't be able to activate active stabilization in the ZV-E10, which is a drawback. But when I'm shooting in 1080-120, I don't move with the camera and I know that I'm gonna be slowing it down in post-production. So I'll just hold it handheld like this and I'll get my shot. No walking. The ZV-E10 II has a 26 megapixel sensor, and the iPhone 15 Pro has a 48 megapixel sensor. Megapixels refer to the resolution of a digital camera. So generally, the more megapixels a camera has, the better image quality it can produce. However, it's important to note that megapixels are not the only factor in determining image quality, as other factors such as bigger sensor size and the lens quality or the glass that's on the end of your camera, those all play a significant role. In my tests, when we scaled in, I found that the iPhone had a more digitally sharpened look and the ZV-E10 II had a more natural look. But I think the combination of lower megapixels on the ZV-E10 paired with a bigger sensor matched up evenly with the iPhone 15 Pro's larger megapixel count with a smaller sensor. I hope that makes sense. Green screens are used by content creators to produce shots to superimpose different backgrounds or settings behind the product being showcased. This technique is helpful for e-commerce websites, advertisements, and product photography because it allows a product to be placed in various environments without physically moving it. By shooting the product in front of a green screen, the background can easily be replaced in post-production by keying out the product. This makes a versatile and cost-effective way to present products in different contexts, so I thought it would be very important to use both cameras with a green screen to see how they would perform in case that's what you're into shooting. Both of these cameras did an outstanding job when it came to keying out the green screen, and I could use either of these cameras as a professional green screen camera, no problem at all. I would easily do it. So if you do green screen work, I would say either of these cameras will work great. If you wanted to vlog with either of these cameras, you would have a hard time with the iPhone 15 Pro because you wouldn't be able to see the display. You could use the front-facing camera and hold the camera like this, but if you're using the front-facing camera, the image quality downgrades. But the fact that you cannot see the display is a huge downside when it comes to vlogging. The ZV-E10, on the other hand, has a flip screen, so you can actually see what you're doing, you can see the frame, and you don't have to hope that you're cutting off your head and you go to post-production and realize that you have a bunch of unusable footage. So that makes this camera as a vlog camera a lot better. than the iPhone 15 Pro, just in functionality alone. Also, the ZV-E10 Mark II has audio directivity, which can either record from the front of the camera, the back of the camera, or be set to auto, and then the camera will decide where the source of audio is coming from. And if we're talking about vlogging, the ZV-E10 Mark II has a built-in cinematic vlog set aspect ratio to cinemascope ratio of 2:35:1. It shoots in 24 frames per second. It has 5 different looks and 4 different moods. Let me know if you'd like me to try to make a cinematic looking video with this preset. All right, now let's jump out into the field and see what both of these look like in frame and sound like. This is what it would look like, and this is what it would sound like. I have the lens all the way back to 16 millimeters, and I do have active stabilization on. Don't forget, you don't have a display that you can look at while you're vlogging, so you're kind of just shooting blindly. But I'm more interested in the audio. Although I think both audio systems are decent, if you want to up your audio game, then I would invest in an external mic, either a shotgun mic or a lav system mic, and hook them up to both cameras. This way your audio will be top notch. For the ZV-E10 Mark II, you could get the ECM M1, which hooks up to the top of the camera. It doesn't even have a battery, and you will not need a mic to go into the mic hole on the side. So you're talking about a very portable setup that doesn't really need anything other than just hooking it up to the top of the camera, and then you can get some really clean audio into your camera using the intelligent hot shoe on the top. I made a video on that mic, and I'll leave it in the description in case you're interested. I set both cameras up to shoot in 4K 24 with program auto exposure on the ZV-E10 Mark II. I was interested in how fast both of them heated up while continuously recording. There wasn't much of a difference at that 5-minute mark, but we really saw a drastic change at the 10-minute mark when the ZV-E10 Mark II was 9 degrees hotter than the iPhone 15 Pro. At the 45-minute mark, that gap started to close back up and got back within about 16 degrees at the end of the test. Neither camera ended up overheating on me in these tests. One thing that I did find interesting in my battery exhaust test was the 45 minutes of filming on both batteries drained about the same, with the iPhone having a slight edge at 27% of its battery being drained. The time that it took to charge to 100% had a big difference though. With the ZV-E10 Mark II, it almost took 3 hours, whereas with the iPhone, it was just over an hour to charge. In that 45-minute clip, we measured the actual file size that was recorded on the iPhone, which only took up 11 gigabytes. And the ZV-E10 Mark II took up 35 gigabytes. All of these tests were done in a controlled environment, but I did want to give you a look into the differences between both cameras and where their thresholds lie, so you can have a good idea of which one is better for what you're doing. Let's talk about low light. The ZV-E10 Mark II will blow the iPhone out of the water when it comes to low light shooting, especially when you have a fast lens like the Viltrox 13mm f1.4 or that Tamron 17-70 f2.8 like we talked about. But the reason I like to shoot in low light with this Viltrox 13mm f1.4 is because my aperture will be completely opened up, which will allow a lot of light into the sensor, which means I don't have to crank my ISO up too high. When I shot the cinematic video for the iPhone, I ended up not using a lot of the low light footage because of its smaller sensor size. It just didn't look good. All of the darks were falling apart. There was a lot of noise in the shadows. It just didn't look too good. In super low light situations, straight out of the box, the iPhone footage is virtually unusable. I also had the ability to manually expose both cameras by downloading the Blackmagic camera app, but was finding that the footage still did not look good in low light no matter which exposure settings I was using. Keep in mind that the 15 Pro's aperture is fixed, so we're already starting off on a bad foot. Either way, the ZV-E10 Mark II sensor will outperform the 15 Pro in every low light situation you might find yourself in. When I throw the iPhone into ProRes log, it definitely does better, but it still gets beaten out by the ZV-E10 Mark II. The iPhone can be distracting for someone who is trying to make content with it. You could be focusing on your frame, trying to get a good shot, and then a text message will come through or someone calls you, and the next thing you know, you're scrolling and you're a half hour down a rabbit hole, and now you didn't get your shot. Thankfully, you can turn it on airplane mode. But with the ZV-E10 Mark II, you have a dedicated content creator camera in your hand with a powerful image punch. And when it's in your hand, you feel compelled to just go out and make content with it with no distractions, purely focusing on your craft. I mentioned that the ZV-E10 Mark II has different ports, so you can actually hook up an external mic to this camera, which you could also do with the iPhone 15 Pro, either using the Bluetooth function, or you could actually have a mic connected right to the USB-C on the bottom of the iPhone. The Mark II also has a headphone port at the bottom here, so you can monitor your audio while you're filming, or you could listen to your audio on playback to make sure nothing was peaking. But you could also use headphones hooked up to the USB-C on the bottom of the iPhone to monitor your playback to make sure that nothing is peaking. But the ZV-E10 Mark II also has an HDMI out port, so you could record externally to a monitor if that's what you so choose to do. And the USB-C port that's on the Mark II is made for not only charging your camera, but also for image transfer. And the USB-C on the bottom of the iPhone is also used for charging, image transfer, and you can record externally in ProRes log 60 frames per second. I prefer to have a dedicated camera in my hands, not only because the image quality will be better than the smartphone, especially in low light conditions, but also because I'm forced to focus on the frame, the lighting, and telling a good story. The fact that I have more control over my exposure without having to download any extra apps is a huge plus, along with all of the customization that I can do on both the outside of the camera and on the inside, the menu system. The ZV-E10 Mark II is made specifically for content creators, whereas the iPhone is made more for iPhone users who would like to create content. If you're a beginner and just want to go out and start creating content with the smallest, most minimalistic setup, I'd pick up the iPhone 15 Pro. And if you're at the point where you're growing out of your smartphone and you want to go have better exposure control, have a more dedicated feel to a camera, and just go get some unbelievable image quality, then I'd say pick up the ZV-E10 Mark II. Yes, you could cross over the iPhone to filmmakers who want a pocket camera, but it does have more limitations than the ZV-E10 Mark II. I would also purchase a phone case and a glass protector for your iPhone 15 Pro, and I would go with the higher media storage option like 256 gigabytes, which starts at $10.99, or the 512 gigabyte storage, which starts at $12.99 if you plan on shooting in ProRes log. That inches you closer to the price of the ZV-E10 Mark II, which is a nice lens, but there's still a significant price gap between these two cameras. Also, if you decide to pick up the Mark II, I would recommend picking up a more dedicated lens than the kit lens like the Tamron 17-70 or the Sigma 18-50. Any of those lenses will suit you way better than what the kit lens can do. I purchased the iPhone 15 Pro back when it was released because I needed a new phone anyways. And why not have an extremely good camera on your phone if you have the resource? I went with the 15 Pro over the 15 Pro Max because of the smaller form factor. I would like that telephoto lens on the 15 Pro Max, but not enough to deal with the consistent issue of a bigger phone taking up more pocket space. If I had $1,700 to spend and I had to make a decision between these two cameras, I would pick up the ZV-E10 Mark II with a Tamron 17-70 f2.8 and a flip phone. Sorry. I'm Joe with the Film Alliance. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if I missed anything. Have a great time filming out there.